The warm amber glow of the restaurant spilled across white linen tables and gleaming glasses. The air hummed with the sound of violins and soft laughter, a blend of comfort and elegance. Couples leaned close, voices hushed, eyes warm. It was a perfect place for romance or heartbreak. Sophie sat alone near the window, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore a pale blue floral dress her aunt had insisted she wear, a birthday surprise. She called it. Her blonde hair framed her face gently, and her makeup was careful but simple. She sat tall in her electric wheelchair, posture perfect but shoulders tense. Her hazel eyes flicked toward the door every few seconds, hope flickering beneath her calm. Her aunt had arranged this blind date. "You've hidden long enough, darling. Let someone see you again." Sophie had smiled, not because she believed her, but because sometimes hope is easier than honesty. Then came the sound of polished shoes and mocking laughter. A group of young men, all confidence, slick hair, and designer jackets, approached her table. One of them sat down without asking, his friends circling like vultures. "Are you Sophie?" he asked, voice dripping with false charm. "Yes," she said cautiously. "Good." Another added with a smirk. "We were afraid you wouldn't show." Before Sophie could process what was happening, a waiter appeared with a small birthday cake. "Compliments of your date," he said, confused but polite. The boys erupted in exaggerated applause. "Happy birthday, Sophie," one shouted. Then, laughing, another dipped 2 fingers into the frosting and smeared it across her cheek. More laughter followed, harsh, cruel, merciless. Someone smeared cream on her forehead. The cake toppled into her lap, crumbs and frosting staining her dress. Phones flashed. One of them cackled. "A paralyzed girl looking for love. Now that's comedy gold." Sophie froze. Humiliation flooded her body. Her vision blurred. She looked for help, for kindness, but the diners nearby stayed silent. Eyes darted away. Forks froze midair. No one moved. Tears welled in her eyes and slid down her cheeks, falling onto the ruined cake in her lap. The laughter around her blurred into noise until a small voice broke through, clear and innocent. "Daddy, why is that lady crying while everyone's laughing?" The restaurant went silent. At a nearby table, a little girl with chestnut curls stared at Sophie, confusion and empathy mixing in her wide eyes. Her father turned to look, a man in his early 30s, dressed in a simple blazer, quiet strength in his posture. His eyes locked onto Sophie. The tears, the trembling hands, the humiliation, and something inside him shifted. He stood, without hesitation. He crossed the room. The laughter stilled. Sophie looked up, startled, as the man pulled out the chair beside her and sat down. He reached for her trembling hand and said, calm but firm, "She's with me." The words struck like thunder. The boys froze. Recognition flickered in the waiter's eyes, and then in everyone else's. The man was Daniel Hart, CEO of one of the state's fastest-growing companies. The air changed instantly. Power, respect, fear, they all filled the space those boys once owned. They stammered excuses and backed away, vanishing within seconds. Daniel didn't even look at them. His focus stayed on Sophie. His thumb brushed across her hand gently, reassuring her without a word. For the first time that night, the world around her stopped laughing. Daniel hadn't come there to be anyone's hero. He'd come for one reason, to keep a promise to someone he'd lost. Every year, on this exact night, he visited this restaurant. It was the last place his wife had smiled before a drunk driver ended her life 3 years ago. Since then, Daniel had lived behind walls of success, armor hiding a broken man. Only his daughter, Mia, had kept him alive. Her laughter, her questions, her small hands pulling him out of grief. When he looked at Sophie, something inside him recognized that same pain, that same quiet fight to stay dignified when the world tried to crush you. He didn't know her story. Not yet, but he saw her, really saw her. Sophie's breath trembled as Daniel pulled a folded handkerchief from his blazer and carefully dabbed at the frosting on her cheek. She flinched, whispering, "I can do it." He nodded, handing her the cloth. She wiped away the mess, bit by bit, trying to erase the humiliation. Daniel poured her a glass of water, then said gently, "I'm Daniel, and that little girl, Over there is Mia. She insisted on spaghetti tonight. Sophie managed a small smile. I'm Sophie. Nice to meet you, Sophie, he said softly. The waiter hovered nearby. Daniel glanced at him. 2 plates of penne arrabbiata, he said, and a small birthday cake. Nothing fancy. Sophie blinked. You don't have to. No one has to be kind, he interrupted. But sometimes it's all that's needed. The waiter smiled faintly before walking away. Around them, people who had watched in silence now watched with quiet respect. Daniel leaned forward, his voice low. You know, it only takes one person to see you the right way, and the world goes quiet. Sophie's throat tightened. For the first time in a long time, someone wasn't looking at her chair. Just her. Moments later, little footsteps approached. Mia appeared beside the table, clutching a napkin in her small hand. She looked up shyly. You're so pretty, she said softly. Like Mommy. Sophie's breath caught. Her trembling fingers reached for Mia's hand. Thank you, she whispered, tears spilling silently. They weren't from shame this time. They were from something warmer, something like being seen. Later, under the soft glow of the streetlights, Sophie sat at the bus stop, Daniel's handkerchief clutched tightly in her lap. He had offered her a ride, but she had declined. Independence was all she had left to control. He appeared beside her again, quiet and patient. Tonight was really nice, she said finally. Maybe the nicest birthday I've ever had. Daniel smiled softly. You deserve nice things. She laughed weakly. I'm not used to people being this kind. He crouched beside her. You don't have to earn kindness, Sophie. You already deserve it. Her eyes shimmered. People say that, but they leave when it gets hard. He paused, then reached into his blazer and handed her a card. I'm not here to rescue you. I've already failed to save someone I loved. My wife died in a car accident. Drunk driver. I know what helpless feels like. She met his gaze, breath uneven. I'm not here to be a hero, he said softly. Just a father trying to raise a little girl who still believes people are good. And she said, I smiled for the first time in months. Because of you. The bus arrived. Sophie didn't say goodbye. She just looked at him, really looked. And for the first time in years, she believed that maybe, just maybe, someone saw her. 3 weeks passed. Autumn had deepened, painting the city in shades of gold and amber. The air smelled faintly of rain and coffee, and the streets were busy with hurried footsteps and falling leaves. Sophie now spent her mornings at a small bookstore near the university, not because she was paid well, but because it felt like peace. She loved the way people whispered between shelves, how the scent of paper filled the air, and how stories made her forget the heaviness of her own. That morning, as she stacked a new shipment of poetry books, a familiar voice broke through the quiet hum of the store. Excuse me, it said, smooth calm, but laced with smiles she'd never forgotten. She froze. Then she turned her wheelchair slowly. Daniel stood there, hands in his pockets, his little girl holding onto his leg with that same shy curiosity from the restaurant. Sophie's heart fluttered. Daniel, he smiled faintly. I was hoping you'd still remember my name. Mia giggled. Daddy said we were getting books, but I think he wanted to see you again. Daniel's ears turned pink. Mia, he muttered, but his eyes softened when Sophie laughed. She rolled forward. Well, you found me. He looked around the cozy store. This suits you. It's quiet here, she said softly, and stories don't judge. Neither do people who've been through their own chapters, he replied. For a moment, silence lingered, gentle, not heavy. Then Daniel pulled something from his bag, a small white envelope. You left this at the restaurant that night, he said, handing it to her. Inside was a folded piece of paper. It was the card the waiter had written when serving her cake. The part she hadn't noticed then, scrawled on the back, read, To whoever sits at this table tonight, you're not alone. Happy birthday. Her breath caught. You wrote this? He nodded. Every year. My wife's favorite spot. She used to say, leave a little hope behind, just in case someone needs it. Her eyes filled with tears. So that night, I didn't come to save you, Daniel said gently. I came to remember her. But Maybe she wanted me to find you. Mia tugged his sleeve. Daddy, can Miss Sophie come to park with us? Sophie smiled sadly. I'd love to, but I have my shift. Daniel looked toward the store manager, who was pretending not to listen. How much for her afternoon? The manager laughed. For her? Take her. She's overdue for a break. And just like that, Sophie found herself at the park, the same one she used to visit before the accident that took her ability to walk. The laughter of children filled the air, and the sight of Mia chasing Bubbles made Sophie's chest ache with something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Daniel sat beside her on the bench, watching his daughter run. You seem lighter, he said. Maybe because no one's looking at the chair anymore, she replied softly. Just me? He smiled. That's all I ever saw. They talked for hours, about books, about grief, about how pain never really leaves but softens when shared. Daniel told her about the night. He almost quit everything. How Mia's laughter stopped him. Sophie told him about the car crash, how it took more than her legs. It took her confidence, her dreams, her dance. You danced? He asked quietly. Every day, she whispered, until the music stopped. He looked at her for a long time, then said, Maybe it's time to turn it back on. 2 months later, the city buzzed with excitement. The Heart Foundation Gala, Daniel's annual charity event, filled the ballroom with the glitter of chandeliers and polished marble floors. Reporters lined the edges, flashes of cameras painting the night in silver. But this year, something was different. At the center of the stage, a soft spotlight illuminated a woman in a long flowing gown, pale gold, shimmering like moonlight. Her hair was pinned loosely, and though her wheelchair remained, she carried herself like a queen. Sophie. The crowd hushed as music began to play, slow, hauntingly beautiful. A violin echoed through the room, joined by a soft piano melody. And then, to everyone's surprise, Sophie began to move, her arms lifted gracefully, tracing invisible shapes in the air. Her hands told stories, of pain, of loss, of healing, and every gesture was poetry. Daniel stood in the crowd. Mia perched on his arm, tears glistening in both their eyes. Sophie's movements were not about limitation. They were about freedom. She wasn't dancing despite her chair. She was dancing with it. It was no longer a symbol of loss. It was part of her art. When the music ended, the room erupted in applause. Cameras flashed. People rose to their feet. But Sophie's eyes searched only for one person. Daniel was already walking toward the stage. He stepped up, ignoring the cameras, the murmurs, the spotlight, and knelt before her, not in pity, but in awe. You brought the music back, he said softly. She smiled through her tears. You reminded me it was still there. Mia ran forward, hugging Sophie's arm. You're like a real princess. Sophie laughed. Only because I have a little angel who believed in me. Daniel looked at her, his voice breaking slightly. Sophie, I thought I'd lost every reason to believe in love again. And then you smiled. Her breath caught, and I thought I'd never be loved again. But then you stayed. He took her hand gently. No grand gestures, no promises, just truth. Then maybe it's time we both stopped running from what's left and started building what's next. The room seemed to fade, the cameras, the crowd, the noise. All that remained were two people who had both lost everything once and somehow found each other in the ruins. As the night went on, Daniel introduced her not as a charity case, not as a guest, but as his partner in the foundation and in life. Together, they announced a new project, the Harmony Initiative, a dance and art therapy program for people with physical disabilities, giving them space to rediscover movement, joy, and purpose. When the applause came again, Sophie didn't cry this time. She smiled, because this was the life she thought she'd never have again. Later, under the moonlight outside the hall, Daniel pushed her gently along the quiet garden path. The world felt still, peaceful. Mia had fallen asleep in his arms earlier, leaving them in silence. Sophie looked up at the stars. Do you ever think your wife would have wanted this? Daniel's eyes softened. She would have wanted me to live again, and she would have loved you. Tears welled in Sophie's eyes. Thank you for seeing me when no one else did. He leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. You didn't need saving, Sophie. You just needed someone to remind you you were never broken. And for the first time in years, she believed it. Because sometimes love doesn't arrive with fireworks or fairy tales. It walks quietly into your worst night, sits beside you, and says, you're not alone anymore.